The date was December 26, 1900. A supply vessel called the Hesperus approached the remote Flannan Isles off the western coast of Scotland, cutting through gray, churning waters toward a lighthouse that stood silent on the cliff. The lighthouse keeper aboard the vessel scanned the tower through the mist. No light, no signal, no movement. And as the ship drew closer, the crew noticed something that made even the most seasoned sailors uneasy. Not a single soul had come out to meet them. What they found when they finally came ashore would become one of the most enduring and genuinely baffling mysteries in maritime history. 3 experienced lighthouse keepers, men who had worked these treacherous waters for years, had simply ceased to exist. No bodies, no clear signs of struggle, no rational explanation that fully accounts for every detail, and the door to the lighthouse was locked from the inside. The 3 men stationed at the Flannan Isles lighthouse were James Ducat, the principal keeper, Thomas Marshall, his assistant, and a temporary replacement keeper named Donald MacArthur. All 3 were considered reliable, professional, and experienced. These were not men prone to panic or recklessness. Ducat, in particular, was known as a steady, capable keeper with years of service behind him. The kind of man you trusted with your life in isolated, dangerous conditions. When relief keeper Joseph Moore stepped off the Hesperus and walked toward the lighthouse, he immediately sensed something wrong. The gate to the compound was closed. The entrance door was locked. He retrieved a spare key and entered. Inside, the last meal had been partially prepared but never eaten. 2 of the 3 chairs had been pushed back from the table, as though the men had risen suddenly and left in haste. One chair, however, had been knocked over entirely, lying on its side on the stone floor. The clock on the wall had stopped, and outside, the oil lamps were trimmed and ready to be lit, as if the keepers had intended to return at any moment. Moore searched the island. He found nothing. No trace of the 3 men anywhere on the rocky, windswept terrain. He signaled the Hesperus, and a full search party came ashore. They combed every inch of the small island. What they discovered at the western landing added another layer of strangeness to an already deeply unsettling scene. Down at the cliffs, there was evidence of damage. A large iron railing had been bent and twisted. A stone box weighing several hundred pounds, used to store ropes and equipment, had been moved from its usual position. Ropes had been tangled and displaced. The damage suggested that at some point, waves of extraordinary force had struck that area of the cliffs. Yet the island's east landing, on the opposite side, showed no such damage at all. The official inquiry, led by the Northern Lighthouse Board, concluded that the 3 men had likely gone down to the western landing during or after a severe storm and been swept away by a rogue wave. It was a logical explanation, and it accounted for the physical evidence at the cliffs. But it left a number of details stubbornly unresolved. The log entries recovered from the lighthouse told a strange and troubling story. Thomas Marshall, who kept the records, had written entries for December 12th, 13th, and 14th, the final entries in the log. On December 12th, he described a severe storm and noted that Ducat had been quiet and that MacArthur had been weeping. On the 13th, the storm had continued, and Marshall wrote that all 3 men had been praying. On the 14th, he recorded that the storm had passed and the sea had calmed. His final words were measured and professional. Then nothing. The entries simply stopped. What makes those log entries so difficult to reconcile with the official explanation is this: weather records from surrounding areas showed no evidence of an exceptional storm during those dates. Ships in nearby waters reported relatively calm conditions. Some researchers have questioned whether Marshall's log entries were genuine, whether they were altered, or whether the dates themselves were somehow recorded incorrectly. None of these possibilities has been confirmed or ruled out with certainty. The mystery of the Flannan Isles is not unique in the annals of unexplained disappearances at sea and in isolated places. The story carries echoes of the Mary Celeste, the famous vessel discovered drifting in the Atlantic in 1872, with its crew vanished and a half-eaten meal still on the table. It also resonates with accounts from other lighthouse stations throughout history, where keepers have reported strange sounds, unusual atmospheric phenomena, and an overwhelming sense of presence in the darkness beyond the lamp room. Whether these connections reflect something meaningful or simply the human tendency to find patterns in tragedy is, of course, a matter of perspective. Several theories have been proposed over the decades, and each one manages to explain some of the evidence while leaving other pieces unaccounted for. The most widely accepted explanation remains the rogue wave theory. Waves of extraordinary size and force are a documented reality in the waters around the Outer Hebrides. It is entirely plausible that one or two of the men went to inspect storm damage at the Western Landing, that a sudden swell struck, and that the third man rushed down to help, only to be swept away as well. This would explain the damaged equipment, the overturned chair, and the abandoned meal. It would not, however, fully explain why experienced men would approach a dangerous cliff edge without proper precaution, or why all three would be in the same exposed location simultaneously. A second theory involves some form of psychological event, a collective breakdown or episode that led the men to act irrationally. The log entries describing weeping and prayer have fueled speculation that something deeply disturbing had occurred in the days before the disappearance. Some researchers have suggested that prolonged isolation, combined with the relentless noise and pressure of a severe storm, could have pushed the men to a breaking point. But this theory requires a chain of events that leads to all three men leaving the lighthouse together and never returning, and it still does not account for the locked door. That detail, the door locked from the inside, is perhaps the most quietly haunting element of the entire case. A door locked from within suggests that someone was inside, or had been inside, when it was secured. It implies intention, awareness, a deliberate act. And yet, no one was there. The lighthouse was empty. The lamp was unlit. The men were gone. There are those who have approached the case from a different direction entirely, suggesting that the Flannan Isles themselves may hold some significance that goes beyond the physical. The islands, known locally as the Seven Hunters, had long carried a reputation in Scottish folklore as places of spiritual power and unease. Local fishermen had traditionally avoided landing on them, believing the islands to be inhabited by presences that did not welcome human intrusion. The lighthouse, built in 1899, was one of the first permanent human structures on the islands. Whether one finds meaning in that context or not, the folklore existed long before the disappearance and continues to be part of the story's atmosphere. What remains, more than a century later, is a case that has never been fully closed. 3 professional men vanished without a body, without a witness, and without a definitive explanation. The physical evidence is real and documented. The log entries are strange and contested. The locked door has never been satisfactorily explained, and the lighthouse still stands on those gray, wind-scoured cliffs, automated now, tended by no one, its light turning faithfully through the long northern nights. There is something in this story that refuses to settle, not because the answer is necessarily supernatural, but because the answer, whatever it truly is, has never been found. The sea keeps its secrets, the islands keep theirs. And somewhere in the gap between what we know and what we cannot explain, 3 men simply stepped out of the world and did not come back. If this story left you with more questions than answers, you are in very good company. Drop your own theory in the comments below. There is no consensus, and your perspective genuinely matters. If you want to keep exploring cases like this one, where the evidence is real but the truth remains out of reach, subscribe and stay close. The next mystery is already waiting.